Growing a business is hard, but it does not have to be. Once a week, we take a break from the hustle and bustle in business to talk about innovations and what's new in the C suite. This is the Fractional C Suite Retreat. This retreat is sponsored by your CMO, helping organizations grow with better marketing strategy.
Welcome to the C-Suite Retreat podcast. I'm Dave Blanchard, the host of today's episode, and I'm joined here by Ken Acer, one of my fellow CMOs at your CMO. Welcome, Ken. Thanks for being here.
Thanks, Dave. Always a pleasure chatting with you, and thanks for your leadership bringing me on to, or helping me on board onto your CMO team. It's very helpful.
So let's get started today. We want to talk about marketing and how it evolves as a business goes through its life cycle. But I want to get started by just having you tell a little bit about your background, so we know kind of who you are and what your experience is, Ken.
Okay, great. Thanks, Dave. So I am an engineer by training, and I'm a geek by nature. I love technology. I love learning about space and space telescopes, and the other direction, I love learning about biology and what's happening at the cell level of an organism. But I've always been science attracted, and after I got my engineering degree, I actually decided not to be an engineer, but to go into the commercial world. So I went to work for a company for 2 years in a sales role, and I ended up leaving 32 years later. And it was a great ride. I went from a sales role into a product marketing, product management role. And then about halfway through those 32 years, I went into the international team, had a few different jobs in international, but the last 10 years of that was growing and managing a marketing organization that did not exist when I got into international 5 years before that. And it was 55 marketers that we grew out of the sales team. And then over about a 10-year period, just about all of them moved on to something else or retired. And then, and in that 10-year period, we quadrupled sales from, I'm jokingly saying, an unimportant $80 million to a $320 million company. And it was really a lot of fun, a lot of growth, a lot of flying around. And what I did was I worked with 16 companies in every continent, just about, except Antarctica. And those companies were small companies. Middle East had 2 million, Africa had 10, Australia had 25 million, China, I think, was the biggest, around 30 million. But the point is that I really was a fractional CMO in that corporate job, because I had a bunch of different companies and I was coaching and growing those organizations. So when I took early retirement from there, no criticism, the company treated me well, and it was a voluntary early retirement program. I decided that I did not want to go back into the corporate world, and I wanted to work with smaller companies. So I did that 9 years ago. I started my own marketing consulting company, and I became fractional, I'd say, by accident. I didn't plan to do that. I was just planning to be a consultant, but I ended up working with 2 companies for several years, and they both required 60% of my time. So I was working Saturdays and Sundays. Then I'll tell you honestly, COVID hit. It was not a fun time for me. A lot of people did great during COVID. I did not. And when I came out of COVID, I said, I really want to work for bigger companies rather than the startup world. And I started looking around for a community, a tribe of people who could support me. I joined Vistage first, and their theme is, or one of the themes in Vistage is, if you want to go fast, go alone, and if you want to go far, go together. So when looking around at the tribe, by coincidence, I was also looking around for a church. And as an analogy, I didn't want to go to the smallest church that absolutely required that I be there every week so that the grass gets cut or the communion wafers get passed out. And I didn't want to go to the biggest church where the relatively small donation I can make every week wouldn't really mean anything to the big church. So actually recently I've found that nice medium church where I matter, but they don't completely depend on me being there every week. And your CMO is, for me, like that. It's a welcoming community of people, and it's big enough to matter and small enough to care. So I hope
Oh, great.
that's.
Well, so you've got some great experience. It's quite a story about where you took the marketing department for the company that you worked for, and then you've also worked for startups and smaller businesses. So you've seen the range. So diving into the topic for today, which is really understanding how marketing evolves as a business grows. Why is it important to sort of understand that life cycle and how marketing fits into that from your standpoint?
At your CMO, we've just come up with a new slogan. We haven't actually announced it yet, and maybe I'm not supposed to announce it now, but I'll tell you, I love it because it's every company deserves a CMO. And the two companies I talked about as my first clients in this engagement 9 years ago, one of them was a pre-revenue true startup, and the other one we jokingly called a 20-year startup. They just never really gained altitude. They were $2.5 million forever in sales. And the company that was pre-revenue, they really needed strategic marketing in terms of what markets they should attack, what markets they should approach, because their technology, it was a specialty chemical called a nanocrystal quantum dot, and it could be used in lots of different applications, in medical devices and in displays and in computers to run computers faster. And what we had to do was look at all of the customers they had and decide which one or two customer categories we wanted to approach. So that was really a strategic marketing role that I was playing for them. Although what they really needed was money more than they needed marketing help. So I ended up working with them to create pitch decks and kind of talk to their customers, their potential customers. But in doing so, it really was a message to investors as well. Um, the other company, the $2 million company, $2.5 million company, they had the CEO as the chief salesperson, and he didn't have any time to do true marketing. So I came in doing marketing for him, and then I also did some of the sales work, kind of doing both sales and marketing, which is difficult to do because the sales role always just sucks you in and consumes you. Uh, yeah, whenever somebody's trying to wear both hats, sales and marketing, that can be a challenge.
So let's dive into the first stage and just to review the stages, the business life cycle stages are we go from uh, discovery to startup, and then startup to profitability, or startup to break even to profitability, profitability to sustainability, sustainability to scalability, and then scalability to exit. So let's start with as a company is moving from discovery to startup, what are the key things that marketing needs to accomplish? What are the focuses at that point? Um, and what does the organization look like, and maybe some of the channels that are typically deployed at that stage?
So at that stage, it's, in my experience, kind of a crazy inventor, scientist, CEO who has a technology that's going to change the world in his mind or her mind. And that person is the chief of everything, the chief technology officer, the chief marketing officer, the chief sales officer. And what they often need is someone to rein them in from the many, many possibilities that they could approach, and instead come up with the one or two markets that they should approach because
Wow.
it's the MVP, the minimum viable product that their technology enables. And and getting a CEO to limit themselves into something that an investor can understand, frankly. If you go to an investor and you say, I've got these 10 different applications in 5 different markets. I'd like you to invest. The investor's eyes just glaze over and they can't absorb it. But if you've got one killer app that your technology enables, and you can help the CEO articulate that, that's where the marketing, I'd say the marketing advocate, not really a full-time CMO role, but somebody who's the marketing advocate that can help the CEO or the board limit the focus to get on the way toward the first sales, the first concrete money coming in, other than investor money.
So it really helps to focus the efforts of the company onto one market or maybe a small number of markets, which makes it easier to attract investment capital, and also tells you sort of where to deploy your resources in terms of looking for that first sale.
Exactly, or that first application, and finding the right kinds of customers who are early adopters and also willing to be advocates for you and for your companies, so that you can.
And that takes a certain sort of person to do that. Not everybody is an early adopter, and so kind of getting clear on what that looks like is an important facet of it.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right.
So, Ken, is there anything? So, before we move on to the next phase, is there any last final thoughts about that discovery to startup phase?
I think it's just that I really believe, and I'm a big fan of marketing, our profession, but I think it's that marketing really has to be involved in the customer discovery and the definition of the company goals, even at the very beginning.
Okay. Yeah, that's important. All right, let's move on to the next phase, which is the business has opened its doors. It's had its first sale. It's gotten started, and the next milestone is getting to profitability. So, what are the things that marketing needs to be focused on in order to move a business from opening its doors to a point where it's paying the bills?
Right. So I think I'm going to start on the sales side, because the CEO is always going to be the chief salesperson in any reasonable sized company that's not a conglomerate or some conglomerate. It is, so the first thing a CEO is going to want to do, one of the first things he's going to want to do once he starts getting sales, is to hire a salesperson. And he hires a salesperson, and everything's fine for a while, and they're growing. And then they hire two, and then they hire a third salesperson. And then all of a sudden, the salespeople start wasting time creating the same presentation over and over and over again. And because everybody has some creativity in their arsenal, the salespeople become too creative with the brand and the fonts and the colors, and all of a sudden you end up with PowerPoint presentations or advertisements or documents that just look like they're coming from different companies, and it's less professional than the CEO wants to show, or that is the right thing to do. So often the first step that a company will make is to hire a marketing assistant, somebody who is going to be good on the keyboard, good with social media, and can help make the sales team more effective and more efficient. And that usually works to an extent, but because the CEO can't really afford to hire a senior level marketer, they're probably going to get a more junior level person or an agency that doesn't really understand the core vision and purpose of the company. The marketing team then becomes sort of second fiddle to the sales team, and they're not really respected as peers. I'm not talking about how much money they make. I have no problem if a salesperson makes 2 or 3 times as much as a marketing person. But it's about the respect of the management team for the advice that the marketing team can give. So in that kind of a role, again, I think that a marketing leader can step in to help the CEO raise the competence and respect that the existing marketing team or individual can show themselves in the organization. When I talked about those international teams, I had that issue all the time where the company only had 4 or 5 salespeople. They didn't even think they needed a marketer. They brought in a marketer that helped, but then the marketer wasn't in the strategy meetings. They weren't being part of the decision-making process. They were always kind of the tail of the dog being told what to do, and they became very tactical and not strategic. Marketing tactics are really important. That's where the rubber hits the road. But not having a strategy is just not acceptable for long-term business growth.
So would you say that's a kind of a different role with a different skill set, that strategic input versus, I mean, it sounds like you're describing someone who might be a graphic design person, a great, kind of great at copywriting, putting flyers and brochures together, maybe even working on the website and social media, but they may not have strategic thinking skills. And so do you see a role at that point for someone with playing more of a strategic role, interacting with the leadership team, the CEO, from marketing?
Absolutely. And I think it's two things. Dave, you're an engineer also. So the person has to have if the product or service that the company is doing is technically oriented, it helps a lot to have engineers or at least somebody with a science background to help understand what the technology is, and probably more important, understand the customer's application of that technology so that the marketing materials can be adequately understood by the marketer so that they can be communicated by the marketer, or the marketer can pull together the assets and know what's needed. Now, in addition to that, probably more important than that frame of mind is that marketers need to be good at two things: analysis and synthesis. Analysis is digging down into the numbers and finding the jewels, but synthesis is something that just comes by a lot of thinking and a lot of data and smashing it all together to come up with patterns. And then those patterns, if you can differentiate them, they can become markets. And then if the markets are receptive, then you can market something about your product or your service to that customer base.
Can you give an example of that, maybe?
Yeah. So I'll give you an analogy. When you think about the stars in the sky, you think about a salesperson looking deeply inside a star to understand how that star operates. Then the star is a customer, and there are billions of stars out there. And a marketer's job is to pull the lens back a little bit, understanding the individual stars and talking to them and figuring out what's going on with them, but then recognizing patterns. So in that pretty random assortment of stars that are out there, we have constellations. We have Scorpio and Cancer and Gemini. I'm not a big astrology guy, but there are patterns that help people understand. I mean, it helps a sailor figure out how to go because of the North Star or the Southern Cross. And similarly, when we have market opportunities where we can find groups of clients that have a similar mindset and a similar way of thinking, we could go ahead and market differently to those customers. A specific example is the company that had revenue, the $2.5 million company. They sold a medical diagnostic device that tracked people's eyes. When you get hit in the head on a football game, the first thing that a doctor does, he comes and flashes a light in your eye, and then he goes like that with his fingers, and he's trying to measure what's happening or figure out what's happening with your eyes. Well, your eye does all kinds of motions and your pupils contract. And this company, really their technology was eye tracking. They put infrared goggles on the person and tracked their eyes. Now, why is that important? That's because there are something like 80 diseases that are, or maladies that are shown through the eyes. And some of them are balance disorders. Some of them are other neurological disorders. And marketing to that different doctor base, medical base, is different based on the malady that that or group of maladies that the product can be used for. And then different versions of the product had to be developed for different applications. You know, the sideline of a football game for a concussion issue is different, very different from a hospital setting where you're looking at some complicated disease. Concussions are certainly complicated, but that's one example.
Okay. So it sounds like what you're talking about here is that marketing needs the ability to sort of take in a lot of data and a lot of different customers and find, since marketing is largely involved in one-to-many conversations as opposed to one-to-one conversations like sales is, you have to sort of aggregate up a level in order to communicate effectively across a broad segment of customers. And so a good marketer needs to have the ability to sort of recognize those patterns and come up with those common ways of speaking and talking and topics and so forth that are meaningful and will connect with a particular segment.
That's exactly right, Dave. And communication is really important, obviously, on a sales role on a one-to-one basis and on a marketing role on a one-to-many basis. And tying another thought there, and I know you know this already, that one of the key roles of marketing is listening. Of course, salespeople have to listen also. But when I'm listening to a customer, I'm trying to understand their underlying cause, kind of going backwards in the sales process. Oh, you said that. Why did you want to have the product have, you know, these colors or these sides? You know, what attracted you to that? How did you learn about the product? You know, going backwards. And most importantly, when you made this big purchase decision, what was the trigger that got you started along that way, along that journey? And salespeople are trying to get customers to think forward about the benefits of the product and the ultimate sale, where marketers are listening for going backwards to the buying process so that we can be more effective in the famous, you know, sales funnel where people are aware of an issue, they're searching for solutions, they're comparing alternatives, and then they're making a decision.
Okay. So we've gotten from startup to break even. We're paying the bills. The next step is to get to profitability where we are making more money than we're spending. So what's the key marketing focus at that stage?
Well, there's a lot of debate on who's responsible for the profitability of the product lines. And in my experience, it's really only a marketer who can decide the value that a product is worth. A lot of people pay salespeople based on gross margin. You know, they sell higher gross margin products, they get more money. They sell lower gross margin products, they get less money. And that also controls to some extent, the discounting that a salesperson does. But I think the approach that I have always had with pricing is that it's the marketer's job to optimize margin and volume, not to maximize the profit on an individual sale. And it might be that product A has a very high margin and not much competition, and you could raise the price potentially even more and make more money for the company. Where product B, maybe your technology or your product line has higher costs than it could or should, but you want to price it at a point where the two products together are going to give the greatest benefit for the company. And if you just have salespeople who are controlling price themselves and are getting compensated based only on margin, they only sell product A and they don't care about product B. And then the company loses because of that. So this is, I mean, I love and trust salespeople, but sometimes I feel like the salespeople shouldn't even have access to the cost data because we really want them to focus on the customer's willingness to pay and 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 justifying the value and the cost and the price that they're offering the product for.
So you're pointing to the role of marketing in optimizing pricing, not just on a product by product basis, but on a sort of a basket of product basis. And I think you're implying even that marketing might do well to control the incentive structure for the sales team, because in my experience, sales teams, if you put them in a system, they work the system. So whatever the rules are, they figure out the rules and they figure out how to optimize the rules for their benefit, which is great. But you have to be very careful about setting up the rules so that the right things happen. Otherwise, if you're compensating people, as you say, on gross margin, you're going to sell, you may not sell the right basket of products. And so marketing has a role to play in influencing the incentive structure of sales.
Yeah, I think I'd say it slightly differently.
Yeah.
I have been responsible for the pricing and compensation system for salespeople when I was a marketer, and it really was it was full of conflict. So I'd say slightly differently. I think marketing should be involved in and completely understand the compensation system, and be willing and able to give input. But I don't think managing it is the right way to go.
Yeah. Okay, so we've reached profitability. We're making more money than we're spending. The next phase is scalability. So scalability is where the business owner can leave the business for a period of time and the business continues to run. That's where or rather sustainability, I'm sorry. And so what does marketing need to be focused on in order to get a business to that point where the business owner can take a vacation?
Yeah. So the business owner in the very beginning was the chief inventor, also inventing the product or the service, doing the innovations, and finding the customers and matching that. So as marketers early on, the role is to help sales sell more. Pretty simple. And then marketing's role is really to gain insight into the customer's unmet needs. And I believe that it's that product management and product development, owning the roadmap and owning the entire product lifecycle is really a key marketing function, a key product management function, with product management being a part of marketing, an important part of marketing. And owning the, say, 5-year product plan for a product family is a key responsibility of product management. So that means that in a larger company, you might be managing 5 different products at once, all a different life cycle of that product line. And what you're trying to do is create these waves of new products that are launched and born and require a lot of help, just like a baby requires a lot of help in the first couple of years. And then through the exciting teenage years, where the product's growing like crazy and then it plateaus. And then when the product's heading off into its sunset, as the product manager, you might decide to get it to health class or get it to dancing class and give it some new shoes and keep that product going. Or if you have a new product coming online, purposely send that product to obsolescence and bring on your other product more quickly. It all depends on the strategy and your product plans. And you can't start thinking about new products soon enough. So So
Sort of keeping the revenue. So it's particularly in tech companies, which is mainly what we're talking about here, obsolescence comes inevitably and sooner than we think. And so in order to maintain that revenue stream, we need to constantly be bringing out new products that are, I know when I worked at HP, we talked about, eating our own young, um,
right,
because you have to sort of cannibalize the current product in order to stay on the leading edge and not fall behind technologically as obsolescence comes. So marketing plays a key role in mapping out the product succession, so that you're never sort of caught short, by some new development in technology.
right, absolutely. Every product that was ever made was obsoleted by something else, and you can either do it to yourself or somebody else is going to do it to you. You've got to plan it out and and replace lower margin products with higher margin products, maybe because you reduce cost or maybe because you add value and can raise price.
Huh.
There's Raising prices is always difficult, but there's no better time to raise a price than when you introduce a new product with a new feature set.
Yeah. Yeah, then there's kind of driving down the cost curve, and because a new product tends to be expensive, and as you manufacture more and more of it, you get more efficient, costs come down, volume goes up. Um, so managing that whole process is important.
Right. Exactly.
So okay, so uh, we're now at sustainability. The business kind of runs, uh, smoothly without sort of the day-to-day operational involvement of the owner. What the next stage is scalability. So that means really kind of growing into new markets, growing into new regions, growing into new segments. So what does marketing need to be focused on at that point in order to scale a business?
So it's the pretty simple 2 by 2 matrix of products and customers. And are you going to sell more to your existing customers? There's a limit to that. So you have to start looking for new customers or new products that you're selling to existing customers.
Oh,
Um, and I've been personally, I've got not a lot of hair, but I've got what's left is mostly gray because of well, obviously my age, but I got some of the gray hair because of trying to sell new products into new markets, and it was sounded good at the time, but when you try to do both, it's really difficult. So having the discipline to only change one thing at a time, either
hmm.
an existing technology that you have or existing product you have into a brand new market, or uh, or an existing customer base and developing a new product for them. Then there's sort of a third part of it, which is growing internationally, and international growth seems attractive. And I tell you, no matter how much you think you know about your product, when you take it internationally, it's going to be different. It's going to be, especially if it's something that has standards and regulations,
Mm.
um, as many products do these days. It's going to be challenging. And selling
Yeah.
anything into Europe, you
And
have
so
to
that's
have
really what
standards.
that was part of that was your major focus for a couple of decades or more. So so elaborate on this a little bit more. So you talked about regulations. Imagine culture is an issue. How do you communicate things? Do needs change? Tell us a little bit more about, expanding internationally and some of the marketing challenges a company
Right.
would need to overcome in order to do that effectively.
So when I got into the international team, the company was about $1 billion in sales. And I jokingly said we were an unimportant $80 million. $80 is a lot of money, and we were really proud of it. But we got a new president who was a wonderful coach, a wonderful friend still today. And he told us something very harshly, that you guys are an unimportant $80 million, because we were chopped up into all these little companies that weren't coordinating with each other. They literally were speaking different languages. It was like a Tower of Babel, Portuguese and Spanish right next to each other, but not talking to each other. Even the Spanish-speaking Latin American countries barely talk to each other. And the company at that point was really, I'd say, an opportunistic exporter. They built products for the U.S., or there's a German factory. They built products for Germany. And then they looked for opportunities to try to export the same identical product. And basically all they found were U.S. companies overseas with expats who said, I want to use the same thing I used when I was in Houston. I'm exaggerating to make a point, but that was pretty much it. So what we needed to do was, instead of 16 different companies asking for 16 different product changes at random times during the year, what we had to do was we had to get together, create a marketing team that tried to understand what commonalities we had across those borders. And the big commonality we had was it was an industrial safety products company, and the commonality we had in these sometimes third world countries, sometimes second world countries, the commonality was that we were all resource-based economies, either oil-based or mining-based. So we found a lot of commonality in the customer needs across those big, huge industries, those big, huge companies. And then we came together with consistent product requests that would satisfy those kinds of customers. And the regulations in every country were different. They were generally aligned with U.S. regulations or with European regulations, and they're almost always very different, Europe and the U.S. And during the product development process, we had to make our needs known to the engineers, and they needed to understand and design for both standards, the U.S. standards and, say, the Brazilian standards, at the same time, because the most expensive way to design anything is to do it twice. So if you can design it once and meet both sets of regulations, then that's a huge benefit. Then, of course, once the product's designed, we have to have instruction manuals in 16 different languages, and we have to have labeling in different languages. And sometimes software-based products have to have, configurable software so that you can, stock one item but satisfy 16 different languages. So the evolution of understanding and defining all of our product requirements in all of our markets seemed overwhelming. But what we ended up doing was we created what we called global steering teams with 3 different functions in it: sales, engineering, and marketing. And those 3 functions were always from the US or Europe, and then selected people from around the world. The selected people from around the world, their job was to be international, even though they were in Peru or Chile or Australia. And it was challenging for them to gather information from different countries. But some people thought we had a lot of marketers, but they were busy understanding customer requirements, supporting the sales team. In the beginning, it was really a teaching job that I had to teach them what marketing was. And by the end of the time, when we changed from 80 million to 320 million after 10 years, the rest of the company was having a little bit of some challenges. So we were still $1 billion company, but now we're 320 million of that billion. We're almost a third of the company. And now people from the engineering departments and the factories, they're coming to us saying, what do you need? How can I help you? Can I invest in your country? Can we move production to your country? And it was just a dramatic change. And I really give the credit to that mentor and president that I talked about, who challenged us with our unimportant $80 million.
That's great. That's fascinating. All the aspects of that. I know at HP we did, we'd make printers, and we got to the point where we'd use what's called late point differentiation, where the power cord for Europe would go into the box from the outside of the box in a distribution center, so that it was a very efficient so you could design most of it so that it would work everywhere, but that 10% that had to be different could be delayed in the production or in the production process to the latest point in the supply chain. So optimizing things like that gets to be very, very critical.
Right.
So, okay, so let's go on to the last phase, which is exit. So exit can mean lots of things. It can be an IPO. It could be the company's taken over by another company. It could be that the owner is bought out. It could be the owner sells the company to its employees. So in preparing for that, which is another inevitable thing that a successful company faces at some point, what does marketing need to do in order to position the company for an exit?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I think it all boils down to why I joined your CMO. It was systems, processes, and tools.
Huh.
And having consistent processes that new people can pick up and run with, and so that's important for onboarding new employees, but also it makes you more attractive to a potential suitor. If you have repeatable processes that are understood and adopted by the entire team, then those processes, it's easier to adapt processes to a new organization than to start documenting processes from scratch. And taking all that, what I call tribal knowledge, and taking it out of people's brains and putting it onto paper. It's much better to have the processes in place and the tools in place, so that you can keep that ship moving.
So you're really building a system that someone can come in and take over, but have it continue without losing a beat. That's great.
Right.
Okay, so we've got to exit now. Is there any kind of looking back over that life cycle, or is there anything we haven't talked about? Is there anything that you would add in terms of kind of thinking about what does marketing need to be doing at different stages?
I think that the number one job of marketing is to get along with the sales team. The sales team can succeed without great marketing, not as well, but the marketing team cannot succeed without a great relationship with the sales team. So one of the sort of really proudest part of my time with that growth phase of that company was that the analogy we always made was hand in hand. And a lot of people are confused about the difference between sales and marketing. And there's definitely an overlap of responsibility when it comes to creating demand. Creating demand at customers, we thought of as more a sales role. Creating demand for products was the way we defined it was more of the marketing team's role. And there are parts there, and to take that analogy a little bit further, this is the marketing team is the entire arm, including the hand. Sales team is the entire arm, including the hand, and they overlap. They have unique roles and they have overlapping roles. And we would have many hour-long discussions, and I'd say constructive arguments, but we always left the room agreeing on the approach, and we always left the room having a unified voice in front of our team and in front of his team. And that trust relationship actually remains to this day. He's a wonderful Argentinian man who just sold his tree farm down there. But it's just a wonderful, thinking, caring person. I've learned a lot from him. He's a great guy.
So that seamless integration of sales and marketing and being able to operate really as two parts of one body, if you will, is really key. It sounds like in your experience. So thank you, Ken, for that insight. This has been great. If someone would like to connect with you to go a little bit deeper into some of the topics that we've discussed, what's a good way for them to contact you?
Probably easiest is just by email, ken@yourcmo.com, yorcmo.com, purposely misspelled, and unique. And of course, by telephone or LinkedIn. You can get my phone number on my LinkedIn profile or on the Your CMO website.
Okay, great. Well, thanks, Ken, again for spending some time together today and talking about these topics and really sharing your experience, which has been, gathered over decades. So I really appreciate you sharing that with us today. Thanks so much.
Dave, thanks for your thought leadership on this idea of the evolution of marketing as companies evolve. I think it's really going to be an important series. Thanks for letting me share my views.
All right.
And that's a wrap. There's another successful episode of the Fractional C-Suite Retreat. See our show notes and more episodes at fractionalcsuiteretreat.com. This podcast is sponsored by Your CMO, helping organizations grow, save time and money with better marketing strategy and fractional execution. Visit them at yorcmo.com, yourcmo.com. Spelled wrong on purpose.